Hello and welcome to Afternoon Tea and Talk for the State Library of Victoria. My name is Astrid Edwards, and although this event is for the State Library of Victoria, I am coming to you today from Sydney. Now I would like to acknowledge the land that the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, on whose land I am currently living and working. I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and those of you who are here with us today. I would like to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and it always was, it always will be Aboriginal land. Today, Kylie Maslen is our guest. Welcome, Kylie.
Thank you, Astrid. Thank you for having me.
Now, you are coming to us from Adelaide today, aren't you?
That's right. I live here in Adelaide on the unceded lands of the Kaurna people.
One of the positives of 2020 and COVID-19 is that this is possible. Live events between Sydney and Melbourne and Victoria weren't a thing in 2019, and now we can all do them, and I love it. Accessibility matters, and conversations across state borders matter more than ever, I think, these days. Now, Kylie, I don't think that you need an introduction, but I would like to hold up my copy of Show Me Where It Hurts. I'm a woman with chronic illness, a severe chronic illness, and your book about living with chronic illness meant when I read it first and means today a great deal to me. Thank you for writing it. Can you introduce Show Me Where It Hurts to those of you who are watching today?
Thank you. That's so sweet. That means a lot to me. Show Me Where It Hurts, here's my copy, is a book about my experiences living with chronic invisible illnesses. So I have endometriosis, chronic pelvic pain, and complex mental illnesses, including bipolar 2. And the book, really, I wanted to give people like me an opportunity to feel seen and to feel heard and to understand themselves a bit better, but also for their family and friends and colleagues to get an insight into what life is like on a day-to-day basis. I had felt like there were a number of really important awareness campaigns about endometriosis in particular, and we see a lot of commentary in the media about the importance of mental health and the importance of talking about mental health, but very few people were really going further into, okay, but what does it feel like? What is your life like when you have these things? What does it look like? And so in order to illustrate that, I use a number of pop culture references to express those emotions and those insecurities and the barriers to health and daily life.
Absolutely. Now, we are talking in the week of International Women's Day, and chronic illness and invisible illness can happen to anyone, but many of the chronic illnesses that I'm aware of, and the one I have myself, multiple sclerosis, is actually predominantly a female disease. It is a female condition, as are many others. And I wanted to talk to you about the gendered nature of some illnesses as an experience in society and in the workplace, but also in the medical system, and how, you know, women's pain can be ignored, women's trips to the GP and specialists can be undermined. And that is an experience I've had myself. And, you know, you touch on the topic in Show Me Where It Hurts. As a really broad starting question on this area, Kylie, why do you think it happens?
I guess to start with, I know there are statistics that show that those assigned female at birth are have a really high chance of autoimmune diseases compared to men. I think off the top of my head, it's like 80 to 20%.
It's really high.
Yeah. So we know that there are statistics like that. We know that roughly 1 in 10 people assigned female at birth will be diagnosed with endometriosis. But we don't know why. Like, for the majority of these chronic illnesses, we don't have the research and the information to be able to say, this is what the cause is, this is how to treat it, this is how to cure it. Endometriosis has none of that information available, despite hundreds of millions of women worldwide having this disease. As to why, for a really long time, and still today, a lot of the medical establishment is run for and by men, primarily straight white men, and cisgendered, I should say. And when you're when a system is when that's what you're seeing around a board table, they are the people that you will inherently be looking to protect or to address. And so without women speaking up about their experiences, without women being let into these sort of institutions that make the decisions behind this. So I don't just mean having more women doctors in hospitals, which, I mean, that would be great too, but like, I mean women in rooms deciding on science grants, for example, make an enormous difference. It's interesting, I've been thinking a lot about this idea of power versus women this week. Obviously, it's International Women's Day on Monday, was International Women's Day on Monday. But I was really busy with Adelaide Writers' Week last week, so I've just kind of been catching up on the whole Christian Porter nightmare. And I was listening to a speech of his, and I really just kind of drove home to me that he's kind of proof that the system is made to defend those in charge. So when Scott Morrison spoke about the investigation, I'm going to read this quote because I just couldn't even. There is only one system that will resolve this, the legal system of police, courts, and the rule of law. And they're all systems that are managed primarily by men and that are drawn up to protect a patriarchal structure. So all of this is causing just unending trauma to women, trans and non-binary folk. And in order to get things changed, the onus keeps coming back to us to share our stories in the hope that an awareness of how horrible things are might see some change enacted. But then at the same time, I've been reading this book, Fire, Flood and Plague, which was edited by Sophie Cunningham, about the disaster of 2020. And I just read, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but I just read an essay by a scientist who was like, all the information is there. All of it should be so powerful that change is happening now, change should be coming, but it's not. And instead, we just look at what the world's going to be like in 2050 and 2100. How do we say that? And just weep, honestly. And so it's a very roundabout way of saying there is a lot of things interconnected that are all taking away power from women and from marginalized genders. And it's really tough because it's exhausting, basically, to keep fighting every day.
It is exhausting. I agree with you, Kylie, with my whole being. As you said, the information is there. Much of the research has been done, but there is no will at the decision-making level across all different areas in our society. And that does include in our medical communities and our scientific research communities. If everybody sitting around the research grant table is a certain type of person, they don't put money into certain type of conditions or diseases, particularly those that are considered unsexy or don't affect their own type of body. You have referred to the idea of, the onus being on us, on people from marginalized backgrounds, on people who are ill, on women to speak up, to tell their stories. And you have certainly done that with Show Me Where It Hurts. I am glad that you did. And I am glad that you are speaking with me today. And without putting words into your mouth, it has to be exhausting. Not just because you might be tired anyway, but because the emotional labor of having to put it out there when people already know this and maybe don't take any heed. How do you keep going?
The thing that drives me is knowing that I just can't keep going on like this. For generations of women before me have done their best against the systems that they had to endure. But there are generations to come that just, no one deserves to be going through this. And it got to, and I also felt that we got to this place by having women's experiences silenced. And so perhaps the best thing I could do was speak out about it. And to, we were only going to perpetuate the system by staying silent. And to be completely honest, the thing that motivated me right at the start of this book was that I was really severely unwell, physically, mentally, and just the whole process was taking a really awful toll on my mental health, and got to some very dark places. And so I thought, what have I got to lose at this point? I can either sit back and help. I can either, sit back and do nothing, or I can speak out and try and make even a tiny bit of difference and go out in a blaze of glory.
I think you have encountered and earned glory, but you have not gone out in a blaze of glory, Kylie. I am looking forward to the next book that you choose to write one day, should you take that path. I am interested. I have a bit of a literary question for you. You have told your story. You have articulated it beautifully. And for very selfish reasons, Kylie, I am fascinated by people who choose to tell the story of their personal experience, particularly their experience of their own health.
Mm-hmm.
Did you learn more about, and I don't mean like the science or the research, I mean about you. Did you learn more about yourself, your relationship with your body, your relationship with your health through the process of putting a couple of 100 pages of your own words together?
Yeah, it's really strange to think, oh, here's 250 pages of my life. Like, yes, I did learn a lot about myself. I was so grateful when the book was over that I could have a break from reading medical research journals. But I think this is true for a lot of writers, that I often don't know what I'm thinking about things until they're on the page, and my fingers kind of go off in their own. And I sit at my desk thinking, oh, I'll just like, think a little bit about body image, and then suddenly there's no more tea and I've written 1,000 words about stretch marks, So I promise you I won't put you through 1,000 words about stretch marks if anyone is.
Totally fine if you do. Nothing should be off. Totally fine if you do. Nothing about women's health should be off the table, Kylie.
But yeah, it did teach me a lot about myself, but I think it taught me a lot about my own self-expression and the way how I feel more confident talking about myself. And yeah, I had some big realizations about that, more than about the detail, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah. When I read Show Me Where It Hurts, I also had revelations about how I thought about things and understood things. We have very different conditions, Kylie, but I struggle when I go to a doctor or a specialist to find the words that I'm looking for to describe something that they can't feel and that they often can't see physically. And that's why I place such great value on the stories of people's own experience and own life, because yes, it helps other people to understand and it helps other people to feel seen, but it also is writing into our public consciousness, words for things that we don't normally talk about or that we don't normally share. And that makes it really hard for us to go and ask questions or to seek answers or to explain ourselves. And I think that you did it really beautifully. And for those who are watching who may have a chronic illness or who may know someone with a chronic illness, this is going to help. Find the language. I really do believe that. At the beginning of our talk, Kylie, you mentioned the word barriers, and it was kind of in the broad sense, barriers that you have encountered. And because this is the week of International Women's Day, and there are a lot of news stories around about, barriers being broken and glass ceilings and whatnot, I want to ask you directly how you feel about that, particularly in relation to health for pretty much everybody who isn't cisgender and male.
Yeah, it's really International Women's Day. It's an odd day for me, and I think it is for anyone who fits outside the realm of what is sort of known as corporate feminism. So anyone who is not white, anyone who is not middle to upper class, anyone who is a migrant, is disabled, the list goes on. And whilst, you know, there are celebrations of milestones and of achievements to be had, I mean, only a week or so ago, abortion became legalised here in South Australia. It had kind of been for a really long time, but in a way that required doctors to sign off on it, and was very much disadvantaged to people who live in regional rural areas. And I talk in the book about, I often feel this kind of almost cringe, but also just really excluded from endometriosis awareness as well. And March is Endometriosis Awareness Month. And so often the events are big, expensive breakfasts that are also really early in the morning, and I just don't know, like, who is chronically ill is going into town at 7 a.m. to eat a Danish. I'm trying really hard not to swear on for the State Library. Or, you know, that's, you know, cupcakes for sale, and, you know, all the cliches that friends of mine have been sharing via memes all week. I forgot where we started here, but it's really important that when we're having conversations about health, about gender, about basic human conditions, about not forcing people to live below the poverty line, like that we are inclusive, and we take a second to think empathetically about what we're asking people to do, something that this current federal government has probably never done, but I think it's a really good place to start. And it just is so upsetting to me to see this happen again and again.
Yeah. I have perhaps a counterintuitive question for you. I think that there are so many barriers inherent in feminism. They're getting a little bit better, but they only get better when we talk about them. And for a moment, I'd like us just to talk about disabled people, particularly women. People with disabilities are often left out, physically, emotionally, like not even invited to the table, not even considered in the research, the whole deal. But that means that people with disabilities are perceived differently. And for those listening, Kylie, how do you think other people, perhaps able-bodied people, perceive those of us with chronic illnesses and disabilities? Don't hold back.
Oh, it's a good question. Honestly, I think I can only speak to my own fears around this. That disabled people often talk about the amount of emotional labour that is required from us in order to participate in quite regular able-bodied activities. So going to dinner with friends, someone else has chosen the restaurant, and then you need to then go and check that it's accessible, that there's an accessible toilet on premises, that if needed there's a lift that is serviceable. And sometimes the power position is one where you can put that back on other people, like if you're trying to educate friends, or recently I was asked to speak somewhere, and I asked the event manager, can you check for me the accessibility and get back to me and let me know. But yeah, so often, because that work is feels like it's on us, it feels like a really active distancing and like an active othering of who we are. And it takes a lot of education to get people to a place where they understand where we're coming from. And that, you know, if we cancel a couple of times, it's not because we don't like you, it's because we're exhausted, or we just don't have the spoons or the capacity to do anything else that day. And yeah, I mean, I think that the regulation of venues and businesses and the need for accessibility action plans, that sort of thing, and for the provision for occupational therapy within NDIS plans, that sort of thing, gives people a bit more power to ask their workplaces for accessible facilities. But yeah, there's still a lot of work to be done, and my main advice when people ask me what can loved ones of disabled or chronically ill people do, like what can we do to help, my advice is to take the burden away from the person who you're trying to love and care for. And so by suggesting things like, I'm going to the shops, can I bring anything to you on the way home, rather than just kind of wildly saying, hey, I'm around, it really makes it a lot easier. And I know personally means I'm a lot more likely to reach out and actually ask for help, rather than kind of sit back and just be a bit lonely and grim about the whole thing.
That is really good advice, actually, Kylie. I would second you. If someone asks me the general, hey, I'm here, I never really take the offer up. But if someone says, I'm going to do your vacuuming, I'm like, yes, please do. Kylie, we have spoken about some really difficult things today, but I wanted to end on what might be a hopeful question, but then again, maybe it's not. So we'll see how this goes. A lot in the world has changed over the last 15 months or so with COVID-19, a lot for the worse. But when I think about accessibility, maybe there are some green shoots, and I wanted your opinion. How do you think accessibility may have evolved over the last year for people with chronic illness and disability?
The main thing for me immediately was that I was able to work from home, which was something that I had been rallying for some time. And all of a sudden, it's now not only possible, but preferred. And all of these supports are in place to make that happen. I no longer have to go out in the cold with pants that are like jutting directly into my ovaries. It's great. I think there's also been some, I mean, while at times I've found this whole, I've found everything pretty, actually I'll go back a step. I think an enormous thing accessibility wise was the JobKeeper program and the increase to Job Seeker. That had enormous help for people with disability in terms of suddenly they had that little bit of extra money that they needed to buy an extra support or get a proper heater that actually works. You know, things like this that actually make a really big difference to our life. I should say though that the disability support pension received none of this additional funding, and I'm really mad about it. But what has also happened is that it's not a good thing and it's not a good way for people to have come to it, but able-bodied people without chronic illness have experienced a life of essentially what you and I do on a daily basis, and it's been incredibly traumatic for a lot of people. And I don't wish to equate the experiences by any means, but particularly for those people living in Victoria that went through such a traumatizing time. But I think by that, I think through lockdowns, people kind of saw what it's like to spend a lot of time at home, to need to clamp down on spending,
Agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And I think that there isn't an equivalence between lockdowns and illness, but at the same time there is. And I hope that people connect the dots. And if they don't, they read Show Me Where It Hurts by Kylie Maslen and other books written by people with chronic illness and disability. Kylie, we are out of time, but I want to say a very personal thanks. Thank you for writing your work, but also thank you for talking to me today.
Thank you so much, Astrid. And it's always so lovely talking to you.